Yo, what is up ladies and gentlemen, Ghost here, welcome back to Stormgate Central, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at Stormgate's first big update, update 0.1, and all of the new things that come with that. There are aesthetic and art changes to the game, there's a new co-op hero, changes to progression, there are changes to the campaign, there are a lot of changes to the versus mode as well, so we're going to get into all of that. But perhaps more importantly, if you're somebody who picked up Stormgate initially and then put it down and were waiting for it to improve, is the game worth a revisit? So guys, as always, if you enjoy the content here on the channel, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be covering everything going on with Stormgate here, all of the news that comes out for the game in the future, as well as the casted games that I've been doing regularly, and a bunch of guides and build orders. So if that's something you want to keep an eye on, then feel free to leave a subscription. It is always appreciated. So let's begin here with the aesthetic changes to the game and the visual improvements. So first of all, they've done a visual and lighting pass on all of the art, especially for the textures and stuff on the maps, on the terrain, foliage, trees, all that stuff that you're going to be seeing a lot of as you play Stormgate, which I think was one of the bigger problems for people. I certainly think one of the biggest points of critique around Stormgate was that the game looked like a mobile game, it looked too cartoony, too childish, and I think this goes a long way in making it seem a bit more shiny, glossy, realistic somehow. It really does pop a lot more out of the screen at me. But overall, I think this is a great step in the right direction, but of course there is still a lot of work to be done. So this is not just for the campaign, this of course goes across all of the modes that we're going to be covering in today's video, but I will say this, if you're somebody who didn't like Stormgate's art because of the stylization, that is not going anywhere. They're not going to just do a 180 and change the overall art style. All of these improvements to the game are going to come by way of improvements to the existing tech, which can go a long way. I think you guys will agree that the before and after here really does make quite the difference, and I think we're going to see similar upgrades with each and every big update that we get to the game. And then of course, secondly here, the other big visual update that we get for the keen-eyed among you will have noticed that they have swapped out the model for Amara. Now, they've only swapped it out in certain parts of the game. In the actual levels, you're going to be using the new model. It's actually got a mouth flap now, so she like talks within the game. Any cutscene that happens where you just zoom into the character in the game, it's going to be the new Amara model there as well. However, any of the pre-rendered cinematics, even though they are in-engine cinematics, they have not been done yet. And they have put a little disclaimer here informing people that things are still a work in progress and these changes are going to be coming later. Now, I think this is a great improvement as well, but if you are a campaign player and you only really care about the campaign for Stormgate, is this a change that's worth coming back to Stormgate and now playing the campaign just to check this out? I would honestly say no. In fact, I would go so far as to say, if you only want to play this campaign and you've been waiting until it improves enough for you to get a good experience out of it, I would suggest you just wait until next year when the game releases in 1.0, and that way, hopefully, the campaign will be in a state that will be more enjoyable for you. This is simply the first little step of many. All of the other characters are going to have a similar treatment here. As I already mentioned, the pre-rendered cinematics are going to have a similar treatment as well, so there is a lot more to be done, but I really like the direction that Frost Giant are going with this. Okay, next up, let's move on to all of the new content that's coming to the game. There's a bunch of balance changes as well, and we'll get to those later on in the video, but for now, let's talk about the new co-op hero, Castiel. So Castiel, also known as the Orphan of Wintros, he is the second Celestial co-op hero. He's going to be free to play up to level 5, and he will actually be completely unlocked for anybody who purchased either the Ultimate Early Access Pack on Steam or the Ultimate Founders Pack on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and that's to basically make up for the fact that Wars wasn't free on release. So this hero is like a melee brawler that can heal himself and actually take the souls of his enemies. So his first ability is called Darkfire. This will allow him to charge towards an enemy ground unit or a structure, slam them with his shield for 100 damage. The second ability is called Soul Blade, which ignites his nether sword, giving him 40% attack speed for 5 seconds. And then his attacks with the Soul Blade deal 80 damage in a cone in front of him. The third ability is called Cull the Unworthy, and this will actually allow him to sacrifice a target, either one of his own or an enemy target, which will restore 33% of his life and give him 10 energy per supply unit of that unit. So the bigger the unit, the more value you are going to get out of this ability. And then he also gains a 4 stacking bonus damage per supply of the sacrifice unit until he dies. And this buff can actually stack up to 100 and up to 200 by the time he gets to level 9, accruing more and more bonus damage as well as earning +5 bonus armor for every 50 stacks. So the longer this character or this hero stays alive and the more you use this Coldly Unworthy ability, the more powerful he's going to become. So that means that losing this hero partway through the game is going to be quite crippling for you. And then the fourth ability here is called Firefall, which unlocks at level 5, and what he does with this one is he channels it for a second before warping up to the fleet above and then rocketing back down to Earth in a column of dark flames, and upon impact, the ground sort of explodes around him, doing 200 fall-off damage in a large area of effect. So it's a little bit like the Meteor Strike, I guess, for the Archangels. So obviously there's a lot of new top bar abilities that go along with this hero and a bunch of upgrades. I'm not going to go over every single thing here. Instead, I will link you guys the post down below. So if you're into co-op and you're going to be playing this hero, feel free to go and take a lot of that, because there really is quite a lot to go over, honestly. But is this worth coming back for? I would absolutely say yes. If you are a co-op player and that's your jam, that's what you like to do with your friends, then great. A new hero definitely adds more content to the game. I know this maybe isn't the change, though, that a lot of players were perhaps looking for, and I'm almost certain I'm going to get comments on this down below the video, so before I do, let me just go and tackle them right now. I think the reason they've put this character in the game is because he was probably almost fully complete before they even released early access. So since they already had this asset in there, they probably figured, hey, we may as well release this anyway, even though there are probably other things in the game that should warrant our attention. Okay, so the next new bit of content is the weekly Mutation challenge. So this is a weekly challenge that you can do in co-op mode, and if you complete it, it gives you a big boost of XP to whichever hero you happen to be using. And the various mutators that go along with this challenge will either give you a benefit or a penalty. When an enemy unit dies, a damaging explosion happens at the location where it died. All enemy units have 50% increased movement speed, and then all player-controlled units have 50% increased movement speed as well. So once again, if you are a co-op player and you've finished all of the heroes, maybe you've already maxed them out and now you want to jump on Castile, get his experience up, these weekly mutators are going to be a great way for you to do that. Next up, we have a new versus map for the 1v1 and maybe even 2v2 folks out there called Furious Resolve. So I have gone over this map slightly on the channel before. Here is a screenshot of it. Very interesting map there, siege camp in the middle, 4 different spawn locations, and a very easily defendable expansion. So I haven't played this yet, I haven't cast any games on this map, but I'm very interested to do that in the future. And if you guys follow along here on the channel, you'll be sure to see plenty of this map going forward. Customizable hotkey modifiers are here as well. I know this was a big point of critique when the game released, so now you can use any combination of Control, Shift, Alt, and so on to modify your hotkeys. That previously was not possible. It is now, so go and give it a try. Then we've got a really nice quality of life improvement, Pathfinding. So they say, hey, we've heard your feedback about the pathfinding issues, especially with weavers and other large units, and in 0.1, we are rolling out improvements to our push priority system, making it easier to navigate maps and reducing frustrating moments when units get stuck or act unpredictably. So this is a quality of life improvement we believe will have a big impact for players who love tight, tactical control. More pathfinding improvements will be coming in future patches. I know, again, a big point of critique, so it's really great to see Frostchat specifically addressing things that I have seen criticized so often in the game here. Clearly, they aren't going to be able to fix all of the problems that people have with the game in a single patch, but I think they've shown here that they are doing a great job. Next up, the Observer and Replay UI improvements, and this is a personal favorite for me because I cast a lot of games. So what they've done here is they have actually added a match timer, they've added the map names, they've added scores for tournaments as well, and they've added support for different aspect ratios. So this is what the replay functionality looks like now. Now obviously it's not the most pretty thing in the world, it's supposed to be functional, it's not supposed to be that good looking, and you'll even notice there that we can now see the health bars on the units. So last bit of content here, and then we're going to move on to the patch notes. There is a new custom map called Spooky Boneyard. So this is a versus map where a zombie spawns after every unit dies. So they live for a limited time, and they'll generally stay in place where the death happened, and taking a creep camp will send a small pack of zombies across the map at your opponent. So this one is available in both 1v1 and 2v2. It's a nighttime map, and apparently it's going to be very chaotic. So this isn't something you're going to encounter if you matchmake. You're going to have to create a custom game to play this one. But I can already see a lot of interesting things coming out of creeping around in games. Clearly, if your opponent isn't at home and he's busy creeping, you take a bunch of creep camps, you send a bunch of these zombie waves towards his base, well, he may well be in trouble very quickly. So guys, without further ado, let's move on to the balance patch notes. So first of all, the command post, the shrine, and the arc ship have all had their tier 1 to tier 2 upgrade times decreased from 40 seconds down to 30 seconds. And the reason for this is that they want to bring tier 2 units and upgrades into the game a little bit more quickly than they were previously. And the example they give here is that while Vulcans are theoretically a counter to Vectors for the Celestials, they're not able to actually realistically counter them due to how far up the tech tree they are. So hopefully this change should allow us to see some of those tier 2 units coming out a little bit earlier in the game there, which I think is going to be really exciting for a lot of these high level games. Next, the creep camps have seen some pretty big changes as well. Creeps now generally have between 0 to 40% more health, and they generally give 16% less bounty at level 1, but then they will also now scale to give more bounty, veterancy, and animus when they level up. So the reason behind this one is that creeps seem to be a little bit all or nothing at the start of a game. We generally see players moving out and creeping instead of going for something else, such as an early expansion. But then as you get into the mid game, creeps are not as sort of gameplay warping and fairly balanced. And so this set of changes is intended to do the following. First of all, to slightly increase the difficulty and decrease the reward given by the creeps in the early game. Secondly, to create more variance in the timing of taking creep camps such that the same set of units can't capture every creep camp easily back to back, like we saw for example with the scouts for the Vanguard. And then thirdly, to maintain and or increase the bounty given at higher levels. So hopefully creep camps are going to be a little bit better in the mid game to the late game, a little bit worse in the early game. So next up we have changes to the Vanguard. So the sentry post build time has been decreased from 55 seconds down to 45. And I think the reason for this is because they actually had a longer build time than any of the other static defense buildings for the other factions, due to the fact that you can obviously multi-build with the Vanguard, right? You can use multiple bobs on one sentry post, so it is a little bit difficult to balance. If you make the build time too slow or too short, I should say, then it may be too powerful if you put multiple bobs on there, but I think that's not what they saw happening, so they've decided to decrease that a little bit to keep it in line with other static D. The Bob has had its build time decreased from 20 down to 17, and that was once again to bring the Vanguard worker build times more in line with that of the Infernals. So initially they say here that they wanted to give the Infernals more of an advantage in this department due to the need to sacrifice their workers to build structures. However, currently they feel like the Vanguard are at a little bit of a disadvantage because the charge system overall gives the Infernals a lot more flexibility. If you forget to build workers, it's not really a big deal. You store up the charges and then you just build them whenever you want. Also, you can't build Bob workers once you're upgrading your command post, which, you know, the Infernals don't have happen because they still store up charges whilst the shrine is upgrading. And then finally, the cost of the imp is actually built into the Infernal structure cost. So you'll notice that a shrine only costs 350 luminite, whereas a command post takes 400. Now here we have the big change, guys, to the scouts. So get ready for this. Build time increased from 13 seconds up to 18. Initial damage has been decreased from 8 down to 5. The +3 to light there is the same, but get this, the Virillium Claws upgrade for the scout now only gives you +8 damage, down from +16. So the Virillium Claws upgrade that was really integral to the scout's efficacy has been nerfed by 50%. That is absolutely huge. You know, also a nerf to overall damage, 8 down to 5 there on top of that, and then an increase to the build time. So I think we're definitely going to see Lancers playing a much larger role now in the early game because they're coming up next here and they have gotten some pretty significant buffs. So first of all, Lancer health increased from 240 to 260, Lancer armor increased from 5 to 15, the damage has been increased from 10 plus 5 structures to 10 plus 5 structures and plus 5 versus light, which is absolutely massive. However, Lancers no longer have this attribute where whenever they get damaged, they reduce the number of the damage by 2, and then the Mitigative Guard upgrade no longer further reduces damage taken by Lancers from -2 down to -4. Instead, that upgrade is now going to give you the original damage reduction of 2 that we got innately on this unit. So this should be a much stronger tool as a Vanguard player. If you're going up against scouts on a tier 1 base of an enemy Vanguard player, it should be pretty good against gaunts as well. Now the Exos have had a slight nerf there to the damage, taking it down from 13 to 12, and then the +7 heavy has also been dropped to +6. So against heavy units, they're going to be doing 2 damage less than they were before, and the reason being they feel like it's too centralized as a core mid-game unit for the Vanguard, and they want to redistribute some of this power elsewhere across the faction. Next up, the Medtech Master Training, which unlocks the System Shock ability, now requires a central command down from a high command. And this is to act as a direct counter to Debilitate, which comes from the Cabals for the Celestials. So for those of you who don't know what this ability does, Debilitate slows your unit's movement speed down, very effective against early game units such as Hedgehogs, and the System Shock will actually get rid of all of those debuffs on your unit, so that's going to be a nice counter there to the Cabals. Now for the Vulcan, the Impact Thrusters upgrade has been completely removed, and this functionality is now just going to be rolled into the innate function of the Vulcan, so you don't have to upgrade this, you essentially just get it for free. So now there's only going to be one upgrade for the Vulcan, the tier 3 one, which is a lot better. Okay, next, the Hornet has had its damage decrease from 13 + 13 against light to 13 + 4 versus light. And the reason here is to counter the harassment against Prisms. Prisms, of course, being light flying units. The Hornets were just too good of a counter against Prisms. I know Lucifron really like to abuse this tactic, so that's why they've done that there. Then they've made a little bit of a cost decrease to the Gravens, so they've actually brought the Ethereum cost down from 125 all the way down to 75. I think we can all agree, I have never seen the Gravens used. I've never played in a game where somebody builds Gravens. I haven't casted a game where somebody builds Gravens. They just seem to be a extremely underutilized unit, so hopefully maybe a few more people will build them. I think they are going to keep an eye on it though, and if they do need to make further changes to make this a favorable unit, then they'll definitely do that. And then the Helicarrier's bombing run range has been decreased from 40 to 25. Again, I think this was a little bit too powerful, so now those Helicarriers are going to have to get a little bit closer to the action to actually deploy the bombers, which means they're going to be somewhat more vulnerable. Okay, next up we have the Infernals. So Nightfall Infestation now slows down enemy units by 50% for 3 seconds, and then the cooldown has been decreased from 90 down to 60. And this is to help out this ability as a potential counter against Vanguard infantry balls. Then we've got some big changes coming here for the Brute. So the Sundering Soul Frenzy, which gives you movement speed after you sunder soul when you split the Brute and you get the 2 fiends, this upgrade has been removed, and now Brutes get 15% increased movement speed when they split by default. So that is to say the fiends that come out of the Brute, if you manually split the Brute, you're going to get some extra movement speed on those 2 fiends. And then the second upgrade for the Brutes here, called Soulforged Ascendants, which would upgrade your Brute so that you got 3 fiends instead of 2, and they got extra armor. That upgrade no longer requires the Sundering Soul Frenzy, obviously because it's been removed, but it also doesn't need a Greater Shrine anymore. It can actually be researched immediately upon building the Hellforge. But they have increased the research time from 60 seconds up to 120. So again, we should be seeing Infernal players going into some of these more interesting research options a little bit earlier in games. Now the Gaunt has got some pretty big changes coming here as well, guys. So the Plague Axe's upgrade that allows them to apply Infest is now only going to work on targets that are on Shroud. So that's a direct nerf to the Gaunt, but they've also been buffed a little bit here as well. So now the damage has gone up from 8 + 2 versus light to 8 + 4 versus light, and the bounce damage has changed from 2 + 0.5 versus light to 2 + 1 versus light. So they've definitely been back and forth with Gaunts. At some point they removed their infestability altogether, and then they brought it back with the early access, and now I think they want to try some sort of a middle ground here where it's only going to work on Shroud, so you don't necessarily have to go for an army composition that can deal with fiends early on in the game because, well, the enemy just aren't going to be getting fiends. However, there are still going to be a number of ways that you can get fiends with your Gaunts in the early game. So for example, as you're creeping, you can summon an effigy need to get 5 fiends from certain creep camps. Whilst you're harassing, you can use the gaunts in combination with a harbinger, because whenever they land, they put some shroud out there, and then you could, if you wanted, you could drop an effigy on there, which will then be permanent. And in the end game, Shadowfall can of course be used to spread infest to your opponent's entire army, because Shadowfall covers the entire map with shroud for a certain amount of time. So, nerfed in some ways, but also a bit of a damage buff there against light units, so we'll see how that one plays out. Now, next up, the Magmadon. After the Demon Hoof Tremors upgrade, Trample's stun duration has been decreased from 0.3 seconds to 0.15. So instead of them constantly stunning units, really not giving them chance to fire back, that stun duration has now been cut in half, which should give some of the units in the game a little bit of a chance to actually fire back or maybe get out of dodge. Next, we've got the Weavers. Weavers can now walk over other units, the movement speed has been increased, and the Shroud Walk passive trait that allows them to walk faster on Shroud now increases the movement speed by 60% instead of 100%. So that's actually been brought down a little bit. And the reason for this is that nobody was really building Weavers as Infernals. The pathfinding was not very good, and they really just caused a lot of pathfinding problems for your army. But now with them being able to walk over other units, that's really going to be a non-issue. So say you're fighting on a ramp, you want to get your Weaver to the front line so that you can use Lash on an enemy like an Atlas or something along those lines. Before, you would have had to move all your army out of the way and push them out of the way on this ramp. Now the Weaver's just going to walk over your army, no problem at all. Now, Miasma has seen a pretty big nerf here. So firstly, the energy cost has been increased from 40 to 60, and then they've given it a cooldown. So it was 0 seconds before. It's now going to be 15 seconds, which I think is a really good change, right? Because once you do have to channel this ability, if you made the enemy Hexen move out the way, it really didn't matter, because you could just move the Hexen back and then start casting again. Now that there's a cooldown, if you move the Hexen back, you're not going to be able to cast again until that cooldown has refreshed. Next, we have the Spriggan. So cost has been changed here from 75 to 100 Luminite and 50 Therium, and then damage has been increased quite a lot here as well. 2 to 3 on the regular damage, and then another +1 on the heavy there. So actually against heavy units, it's going to be doing 2 more damage. This, it may look small, but this is a 50% damage increase here for the Spriggan, and I think it's fair to say that, after early access came around for Stormgate, nobody has been using Spriggans. They're probably one of the most underused units in the game. So hopefully with this massive change here, a 50% damage increase, we're going to start to see them on the battlefield. Alright, that is it for the Infernals. Now we are moving on to the Celestials. So one of the first changes they've made is the collection rate is now going to cost 4 supply instead of 0. So sometimes you would look at the food costs, especially for me if I'm casting a game, and it's kind of off-putting, right? Because the other factions had all of these Bob workers or the Imp workers contributing to their food, but the Celestials didn't, because if you just had collection rays, then none of that actually showed in the army supply. So that's why they've made this change there. Next, the Ascension Matrix now only requires the Starforge or the Legion Hall instead of an Arc Station. So that's pretty massive, especially there you can get the upgrade for the Vectors. Instead of having to go and get up to tier 2 to get that, you're going to be able to build a Starforge to get Vectors and then drop the Ascension Matrix straight away and get that Vector upgrade. That's hopefully going to bring Vectors into the meta again a little bit. I really feel like they've fallen off since the last balance change, so that's going to be exciting. Now the Argent has actually seen probably the most amount of changes out of any units in the game. So health has been decreased from 210 to 180, movement speed has been increased a little bit, the energy regen has actually been nerfed down to 0 per second, but out of combat energy regen has been increased up to 2 per second. They've removed the photo restoration upgrade completely. Their max energy has been decreased down to 30, and now they've got a new upgrade called photo capacitors, which increases the Argent's energy pool up from 30 to 50 again, which is researched at the Guardian Nexus. And then the long shot module, which is like the tier 3 upgrade, that is now going to increase the range by 3 up from 2. The major feedback around this is that basically early game Argent pushes are just too powerful, especially in Celestial versus Celestial, where it's too difficult to tech to a unit that can actually counter it. And that is true. If you decide to tech to anything and your opponent goes for a massive Argent push, you just die to it, and that's what we see at the pro level. every Celestial versus Celestial is just, you know, Argent spam, so something had to be done about that. Moving on, we've got the Kree, so their health has been increased from 190 up to 230, and damage has been decreased from 16 plus 8 light down to 14 and plus 6 light. So their thoughts here are that it's sometimes slightly too powerful as an early game unit, hence the damage nerf. However, in the middle game and the late game, it really starts to fall off, and so I guess they've given it a little bit more HP there to make it slightly more tanky so that it can act as a meat shield for your army really in that middle to late game stage. Then we have the Cabal, and the Cabal has had Debilitate's duration decreased from 40 seconds down to 25. Wow, that thing lasted for 40 seconds. That was insane. And then the movement speed debuff itself has been decreased by 25% as well, so nowhere near as good as it was against units like Hedgehogs, and obviously since the Vanguards are now going to be able to get up to System Shock on the medtechs way sooner in the tech tree, I don't think Cabals are going to be anywhere near as good as they previously were. The Saber has had its movement speed increase from 2 to 3, but the movement speed bonus from the Mass Accelerator, so that's the ability that gives it the movement speed, that has been decreased by 100%. The movement of the Saber's gone from 2 to 3, which means it's going to move 50% faster, and this 100% bonus will then give it 6 movement speed, which is the same as it would have had before with the 200% bonus when it had the Mass Accelerator activated, if that makes sense. And this is a similar change here to the Weaver. Basically, the Saber was just unwieldy to use, especially with the pathfinding. It was too slow, it was too sluggish, and just sort of an awkward unit. So, really nice changes there. The Animancer, much like with the Hexen, Dark Prophecy has received a cooldown of 15 seconds. And it's pretty much the same thing there. People could just spam it the same way that you could with Miasma on the Hexen. And then finally here, we've got Archangels for the Celestials. So when it's in an avatar state, the weapon shockwave speed has been increased from 7 up to 15, and then after the avatar state ends, the Archangel is actually going to retain its current HP. So instead of its HP going back to the lower threshold that it had before, it's going to keep the extra HP that it gained from going in the avatar mode, even though the sort of max threshold gets decreased. And then finally here, a couple of map changes on Isle of Dread. They've added a tree line in multiple locations to limit early attack paths. The chokes into the early expansions are now more narrow, and they have moved and added various Therium nodes. There's now a double Therium spot near the Vision Camp, and they've also stated that the starting base is going to be closer to your natural expansion. So they say here that the feedback on Isle of Dread is that it's the most polarizing map due to the fact there are many entryways into various locations, so they decided to restrict the attack paths a little bit there. And then Jagged Maw has been removed. It's just gone entirely. And that, ladies and gents, is the end of this patch notes. This video is probably going to be way longer than I expected it to be. I didn't think that the patch notes would be quite so extensive, but I gotta say, I think they've made almost all of the right changes and decisions for the game here. So anybody who's been keeping an eye on the game and you've been thinking, you know, is it worth me coming back in and looking at this stage? Again, to reiterate here, I think if you've been playing the versus mode and you left because of the balance changes, then sure, come and give it another go, see what the meta evolves into this time. If you're there for co-op, there's a new hero, why not? Plenty of content to delve into there. But if you're on the campaign wagon and that's all you really care about, I'm not sure it's going to be enough of a change to really get the campaign up to snuff for you. But guys, as always, let me know what you think about all of the changes down below in the comments. Thank you for watching the video today. As always, have a good one, and I'll see you all in the next one.